mean, that's what you get on
Being 7 o'clock, I'll call to the order the Planning and Development Committee meeting. Could we get the roll call, please?
Tilkitis.
Here.
Folks.
Here.
Sorry. Bondard.
Here.
Munns. Here. Lencioni.
Here.
Gem. Petrilla.
Here.
Warbaugh.
Here.
Fessner.
Here. Thank you very much. Next omnibus vote, but we do not have anything on the omnibus vote, so we will go directly to for item A, presentation regarding draft downtown parking study from consultants, Desmond Incorporated. Take it away, Derek. Thank you.
Good evening. A few weeks ago or earlier this month, I gave a presentation on the draft downtown parking study. We had a good discussion about that. Since that time, we've had 2 open houses, one of which was directly before this meeting here, and we've also issued a survey. So the consultant is here to give a presentation, a short presentation, since we've already kind of talked about this, about the parking study, and is open for discussion and questions. At that point, we'll be closing the survey at the end of this week. We'll take all the feedback we have, make tweaks to the study if we need to, and then hopefully it will be in final form. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jerry Salzman with Desmond.
Jerry, state your name and then take it away.
Hi, I'm Jerry Salzman from Desmond.
Floor is yours.
Happy to be here, and very briefly to present, I think, the results of the study, and then we can answer any questions or talk anything on your mind within reason. Anyway, we, as you know, we started this study some months ago, and I've been in town a number of times doing counts and stakeholder meetings, and talked to several of you in the course of this. We did on-street counts and off-street counts in the study area in the summer, and then again in the fall, weekdays and weekends. We had a lot of stakeholder discussions and several open houses, 3 or 4, I think. I can't remember exactly. Many of the comments are summarized in the report. Then we sort of put together the existing conditions as we see them in terms of the supply and demand, the parking rates, and the public and private facilities, and all that, and looked at the ordinances a bit too. We gathered a list of developments that are likely to happen in the near, the next 5 or 7 years, and projected their impact onto the system, and then finally developed a bunch of options, some of which I think everyone will like, and some probably not everyone. I think that's what we should talk about. But first, the findings. And this graphic, which is a little hard to read on the screen, I think really summarizes so our thinking about parking here. And the orange area, that sort of 2 on either side of the river, are the areas which had the highest occupancies on a Saturday night. And it's interesting because it's kind of an odd pattern, but in virtually every case, with a couple of exceptions, but virtually every case, when there's a full lot, there's an empty lot across the street, literally across the street. But for whatever reason, people don't know that it's there, they don't see it, it's slightly, behind some bushes, whatever it is. And so a lot of our thinking boils down to how do you get people to know where those spaces are first. And then, after that, then we can talk about what you need to do in addition. The exception to that is the southeast side, the 2 lots on the southeast side, because they are both full, and as well as the streets, on a busy Saturday night, of course. And there we have a different solution, which is really our first choice is to share parking with some of the businesses there. But we'll talk about that in a minute. So here's the recommendations. There's actually 2 of these slides worth. There are a lot. There is generally an adequate amount of parking for the current and the future developments. Some may, in certain areas, may warrant additional parking once those plans get a little more solidified. But you really have a 2-day week problem, Friday and Saturday night. The wayfinding signage just needs to be improved, and people really need to be able to find out where the spaces are before they come to town, ideally. You know, sort of if you're coming to a restaurant, you ought to be able to find out where to park. If you're coming to the Arcada, you ought to, on their website, it ought to say park here. The existing garages struggle because people either get into, particularly First Street, get into it and you have to do revolutions, and each level is hard to figure out if there's spaces on it, and you go in, and the second level, and it's a dead end, and it's all full. You have to back up and get back to the ramp. It's a really off-putting experience that can easily be solved with technology, and that is having at the end of each spiral a sign which says, you know, full or not full, keep going. And that's an easy way to fix a really annoying problem for people, particularly who aren't familiar with the garage, who's come from some other town to enjoy an evening and get frustrated by trying to find those parking spaces. There's a lot of different time limits on the street, and it's kind of confusing. I don't think you need so many. I think you could have 1 or 2, either really short term, an hour, or, you know, 4 or 5 hours, something, and simplify it. It'll be easier for people to enforce, and it'll be easier for people to determine where they should park. We suggested, and a lot of the restaurateurs, I think, pushed us to this, needing some space where people can drop off, you know, along the main streets, sort of a drop-off space. Pardon me. We think that's worth thinking about, and just again to make the experience a little easier. And then the real question you have to ask yourself is, if you're going to have all these parking restrictions and time limits, do you want to enforce them? You don't have to have them, but if you're going to have them, we think you should enforce them. And there's not much enforcement. So you're requiring people to be on good behavior, many of whom are, but it's easy to take advantage of it. And those spaces that we're talking about are the ones that you really want to have turnover on. So, we made probably a fairly, at least in the last stakeholder open house, a recommendation that was mixed feelings, and I'm sure you'll have the same, which is to meter some of the really popular on-street segments, particularly on Main Street from the bridge over to the east, towards the east of 3rd Street, to encourage turnover so employees aren't using it all day, or business owners, and also it's a way to get a little bit of revenue that'll help offset some of our other recommendations. With regard to electric vehicle charging, we think that's something you need to start thinking about. There's a lot of ways to implement that, including entirely outsourcing it, and just getting one of the vendors to install them, provide them, install them, maintain them, and get the revenue from them. There's state programs to encourage the take care of the capital costs. There's lots of different ways to do it. Over time, that will become a more major issue. Particularly as you get more residential people downtown, they're going to need a space to charge their car. They're the primary ones who are going to need them. I sort of alluded to an idea that, particularly in the southeast side, but the shared parking is an effective and easy way to take care of some peak time periods when you need more parking. It requires a little negotiation and insurance and many other factors like that, agreements that the city would have to help sponsor. But it's a very good way, particularly when you have a need in very confined time periods. So we recommend you do that, and we've identified 10 or so locations that have potential. 2 or 3 of them on the east side, and then I think lastly, maybe one way to reduce the parking demand is to have more people not driving. So I think that's the summary of our very quickly our list of recommendations, and I'm happy to chat about them.
Thank you so much, Jerry. We appreciate that. Are there questions? Mark, want to start?
Yeah, if you had to narrow it down to 2 recommendations, what would be your top 2?
2? The counting on the garage and actually, I think I skipped over the one, the access on the First Street garage to the 2nd floor, to the north. You can't get, as you know, in the 2nd and 3rd floors, you can't get to the north where many people want to go. You have to go to the south and then walk the whole block. And it appears that the 2nd floor, you can get access to the hallway relatively easily, physically. You have to get approval from the, agreement from the owner of that floor. The 3rd floor is a little more complicated because there isn't a corridor now, but if they ever redevelop it or something, those are the 2 things I think you should do. Sorry, and I'm going to have to take 3, sorry. And wayfinding for the lots, that stuff. Because it's amazing that people don't, you talk to people and say, oh, I didn't know that was a public lot. And it's literally across the street from one of the lots.
Is that lack of signage or just poorly placed?
I don't know what it is. There's some signs in some of the lots, many, and I don't know what it is exactly. But I think that there needs to be, let's start with static signs. If you're going to do that, then it ought to say additional parking, behind you or whatever. That's really the thing. It always feels like the available space is behind you, not where you're looking for it. It's a weird kind of a deal, but that's the what I found. And then the other part is electronic. The website ought to tell you if you're coming to this place, so here's your first choice, here's your second choice. And because everybody uses their phones now to figure out what to do, how to do everything. And you're not tapping into that yet.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? Ed?
Got a couple questions.
Oh.
Yes, sir. I guess going back to the signage part,
Excuse me.
I think we are missing some kind of consistent signage, and not in regards to, originally I thought we'd have some branded signage that would make sense, that kind of mirrored some of the St. Charles branding.
Yeah.
But I was just down in Chicago. I'm not trying to compare us to Chicago, but I was down there, and every time I go down there, the first thing I look for when I'm driving around is the green self-park sign.
Right.
So that might be something that we need. Maybe not as bright or green or whatever, but some kind of mild, symbol that shows parking on a building, if it's on the corner of the building, on the corner of a parking deck, wherever, so that you can see it. That's the first thing. And then going back to your testing, is there a need to test at 9 or 10 o'clock on Friday and Saturday?
You mean to count?
Yeah. It looked like you stopped at 8, so I'm not
We
sure.
stopped at 8 because, it's late and, you got to get people to work late and it's hard and, but I think 8 o'clock people are really there. I mean, there's some bars that, maybe get a little later, but the big numbers, the Arcata is going at by 8 o'clock. I think you're pretty close to the absolute peak.
And then going back to a consistent or a flow of parking, restrictions.
Yes.
2 hours, I think, is fair. That's my opinion. I mean, we could change or look differently from that. But is there an 80-20 rule, going back to what you were saying in regards to who's violating it and who's not, or is it pretty random? Meaning, someone's parking there for 2 hours. Instead of us spending money to enforce it, are most people being honest, or is it...
I think, yes. I think the people are being well behaved as a rule. I think there's some employee abuse, and I think it is as always, not just here but everywhere. It's always in the absolute most valuable space.
Sure.
And so that's why we suggested sort of a very limited metering. And I get why people don't want it, and and all that, but many other towns around here do that successfully, and I would encourage you to think about it seriously. And also, it goes towards a way of funding some of these other things that, the signage, the counting, which are not hugely expensive, but they're costly.
And then in your experience, shared parking, are there incremental costs that come up with that over time, meaning if we have an agreement with, say, the library or say a business that ends at 5, does it typically happen in the future where we're helping them restripe or repave, or is it just
of course, you would do something like that. So so typically, once you get past the sort of insurance and all those kinds of things, which are, I think, really not a huge issue. I'm not a lawyer, but I play one sometimes in public. But the real issue is, so maybe your people plow the lot while they're doing their street plowing, or something like that, and in exchange for whatever, for this permission, striping maybe every so often, or maybe that's part of the deal that they do that,
But that's pretty consistent to be part of the...
Yeah, you should work through all those issues with people. But I think you end up with a sort of a formula, and it's for everybody. I mean, the hours may differ because this place may be open later sometimes, and whatever. But, you have to customize that way. But I think the general outline is probably, consistent.
Okay, 2 more quick points. The electronic sensor or signage for the parking deck that you're suggesting might be a good thing to do. How does that work? Is it based on the cars that are parking other sensors, or as they come through the gate?
There's different ways to do it. And in your case, you're not what you're going to, I think, which in the First Street garage in particular, you have every floor has one entry point where the curving ramp opens up. So at that point, you have a sensor, probably in the ceiling, on the ceiling, and there's ultrasonic and infrared and whatever. It doesn't really matter; they're all the same. And it detects a car going in and records that, there's one car there, And then similarly on the exit, it subtracts, and it has a reader a sign that says either full or not, or it counts the actual number and says 3, 4, 10, whatever it is. And so as you're coming up the ramp, you see the sign that says 2, and you say, well, maybe I'm not going to take a chance on that, or you say, it says 2, I'm going to go and get off and do that and go find it. And then that there's more going up.
So it's floor specific.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because that's in that garage, you don't have to have that. Many facilities, you would just have it at the entrance that says, 3 spaces or 5 spaces, whatever. But that's such a complicated garage that you want to not have to get off that ramp when it's when a floor is full.
Okay, thank you. And then the last one is 85% occupancy seems to be the number floating around out there for everything. Does that number continue to grow with future developments, even if the future developments are providing the right amount of parking or more than enough parking?
I'm not sure I understand your question,
Well,
but I think the answer is no. I think it says that the number is the same. And the reason, let me explain, and then you'll tell me if I'm completely off.
No, I think you're right.
That it's sort of an industry standard that at a point between 85 and 90% occupancy, a lot feels uncomfortable, or garage. It's hard to find those last few spaces. Some of them, there's usually an ADA space or two that are, that are not occupied, so they're not available. And it's hard to find in a big lot, the last corner space. And so, depending on the kind of uses, and if it's 90 for sort of a general kind of a thing, maybe if it's an employee lot exclusively, it's 92 or 95, or if it's sort of a more transient lot like yours, it's closer to 85. So what we say is if you have 100 spaces in a lot, when you get to 85, people don't feel comfortable in that. It feels full. And so we sort of arbitrarily set the 85 to be 100%. And when you reach 85, that's when we would say you have a problem. That's why 85 is used in all those things. That's really the reason. I don't know. I think most quote experts would say that's the right.
I think I'm trying to see if that number changes. For instance, hypothetically, if the old police station is developed and it requires 150 spots, and then whatever developer gives it 150 spots, it alleviates that, but does that change that number?
No, because we would say that at 100 and do it 100 because it's easy to do.
That's fine.
Thank you. If the need is 100 spaces, we would say you should provide 115, let's say, or 110 or something. If it's residential, it's a little different, that sort of thing. But yes, that cushion, that if you build 100, you don't really get to use 100.
Sure.
It's really and that's absolute. Until you get to sort of Boston or something where a space is so dear that people will go to the ends of the earth to find it. But that's,
Okay, thank you very much.
I don't know if that explained it.
No, that makes sense. Thank you.
Long-winded way to go. Yeah, Brian.
Thanks for your presentation. Just to kind of piggyback off of my colleague, Ed, that's a great example, but we have a couple lots that are not city-owned that we lease. If we were to lose those lots, that would push that 85% up. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, let's say it this way. It would push the occupancy above 85.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then the 85% number, that's an industry standard. That's not like a subjective number that you're kind of that's...
Well, it's an industry standard. It is slightly subjective because it depends, it ranges from 80 to...
There's flexibility. And there's okay.
Yeah.
You got a 5% range and you're okay.
But we, because of the users, we believe 85 is the right number for you.
Okay. And then what's really interesting are the surveys that you took, and I really like the surveys that you put out there. And it seems like the businesses and the patrons kind of have the same concern, and that is distance to destination.
Yep.
So it seems like once you hit that 85% or you get at 100 and they're driving around, they get frustrated, and it sounds like it says creating traffic flow problems, frustrated drivers, and ultimately leading them to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
Is that pretty much accurate? Once you hit that 85, 90, you're kind of...
Yeah, it's slightly surprising to me that people would give up if you're going to eat. Like, come on, you're going to really go to the different town to eat or go to the east side or the west? It's just, I don't get it, but people do that.
Yeah, it's just the reality. So So let me ask you this. So there's some things that we have going on in the city and things like that and developments, and there's a lot of walkability, bikeability study findings that we would like to implement, right, to create a better flow of walking and biking in our community. So right now, today, would you recommend removing 35 on-street parking spaces in the southeast quadrant with no alternative? Would that be your recommendation, to remove 35 on-street parking spaces with no alternative plan?
I would rather see an alternative.
Okay. I just want to clarify. So obviously, if you have a solid alternative that's within where distance to destination is not an issue, it works, right? It makes sense.
Right.
Right. Okay. And then what else is interesting is it's still like 91 or 92% of people still commute in the car here. They still come here. Yep. So so your top priorities to maybe help get started with alleviating some of our concerns, I think you mentioned one of them was the digital counters.
Yep.
And then would the other one be wayfare signage? Would that be wayfinding?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. People need to know when they start their destination, you know, you use Waze or whatever, you know,
Sure.
GPS to find your way here. You ought to find your way to parking, and you ought to know that there's not just one place to park next to the whatever, you know. If we go back to that image, you have a lot of lots, and it's not that hard to find one if you know where it is, and so a combination of signage and electronic notification is how you'll get people to find those. And it's a half a block away. So It's not like you're making them walk, you know, huge distances.
So some of the there were a couple of residents that brought it to my attention. I thought it was a good point. Some of the lots that are currently used to house public parking is kind of like private parking, right? It's like kind of like one of these things, well, what is it really, you know? But
Correct.
Once when you do the calculations, I'm not sure if that was actually used, but if it was counted, if the private parking lot was technically counted as public, would it push that 85 or 90% occupancy rate up just a little bit, like more in the southeast quadrant? Like you have the Chamber building, it's technically private, but it's pretty much full every Friday, Saturday night.
Yeah, the average would go up slightly, but it's more significant if it were to go away.
Right. So if that property gets developed, those spaces disappear, and then it. Right. I got it.
This is going to be sort of a moving kind of a thing over time as properties get developed, because they're not only they're displacing parking, some of which has been public and some of which isn't, but it's also increasing demand.
Right.
So as much as they are providing their own parking, it's fine, but as much as it's not, they're adding to the burden.
Now, I know you mentioned like parking meters more on Main Street type of thing to kind of get the turnover and all that stuff, revenue, I get that. So meters, to me, in the report here, it sounds like if you put it near the adjacent neighborhoods, it says it would kind of have a little bit of a negative impact in the adjacent neighborhood because people don't want to pay, so they're going to go up the street and park for free.
Yep.
So if you also remove on the same line, remove 35 or 25 or 12 parking spaces on street, it's going to go somewhere and probably up into the adjacent neighborhood. So I'm just okay. So we're clear on that. And then what do you think of a parking app, like a parking app for all of the?
You absolutely should have one.
Okay.
At some level, you know, it doesn't have to be a super sophisticated one, but I think you ought to have, in the same way you're advertising all the other things in town, if you're coming to town, you ought to be able to find.
Would you prioritize it as kind of like a high priority?
Yeah.
Okay.
I will.
Okay.
And I think it ought to be more importantly, it ought to be on the business's website. It ought to be on the Arcata's website in particular, not to point that, you know, single them out, but they're a big draw, and they get a lot of people from not local, and you just got to tell people where to park. Yeah. And it's easy. It's a little, you know, icon on the thing, parking, and you know, it tells you where to go.
I got one more question, and that's
Yeah.
it. So this shared parking thing, I like the idea. Obviously, distance to destination still a little bit of a challenge, right? So it's kind of hard to. So if it's close enough, to me, it kind of makes sense. Maybe it makes sense, but.
Okay.
So how do you compel or encourage? It's a tough thing to encourage human behavior, change human behavior. So what do you guys do in other situations like that? Do you, is it just you try it out, see what happens, if it works, or?
That's actually not a bad way to do it.
Okay.
The second choice is to encourage valets to park there, because you can sort of control them. Employees is the next group. Again, you can, the owners can. That's
what I want to ask. So the employee piece of it. So it could be like an internal policy at a business or something. How do they enforce it when it's raining, when it's snowing, when it's 100 degrees? So that's my concern, is that I'm looking for that solid alternative that's not going to. I know nothing's perfect, but I'm just kind of throwing it out there.
There is no perfect alternative.
Okay.
You're dealing with human behavior.
Yep.
But you've already sort of we've already touched on 3 different ways to do this. And if each one is 1%, that's a meaningful number already. And some people, and the fourth one, which we talked about, is you tell people on their website when they look before they're coming that this is where you park. We have parking at the library lot at blah, blah, blah. And so some proportion of them will use that. It's easier. It's further to walk, okay, maybe in the middle of the winter we won't, but on a day like today, it's not such a terrible,
Did the construction on First Street Plaza, did you take that in consider with the 20-30% down, or at least that's what I was hearing on that? Was that kind of factored in a little bit in this?
No.
No?
I don't think we did.
Okay.
I mean, we looked at developments around there and what people said was going to happen, but we didn't really.
Okay.
And it may be down somewhat.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much for this. This is really interesting information. I'm hoping that maybe you can help clarify for everybody what the purpose is of parking limits, of putting a limitation of time on a parking spot.
Well, the main reason is to encourage turnover. That is, if you have a store, and whatever, and you want your customers to be able to park there. Drive up. If it's a coffee shop, you want them to be able to go real quick, If it's a jewelry store, you want them to be able to linger a little while, but nobody's going to stay for 5 hours at at the store, hopefully. But whatever time. And when it is taken up by someone who parks all day, it's making it harder for the customers to find space. So that's the main reason.
So you would want to have your all-day parkers to park in something like the parking garage as opposed to the on-street parking.
Correct.
Whenever practical.
Correct.
Okay.
And there are times when it's not practical, but most of the time it is.
So your main driver for something like metered parking would not necessarily be revenue. It would be to encourage them to find more long-term parking.
Right.
If that is something that they plan to do.
It's not the primary purpose, revenue, but revenue is useful because when you tell me, these recommendations you made, Jerry, are so expensive,
Right.
I'm going to say, well, here's a way to offset some of that.
Okay, fair. And then another question I had for you is, when you talk about how having fewer people driving, to Alderman Warball's point of potentially taking away some parking spaces, I think one of the things you are talking about is if you are having more people feel like they can have a more walkable option, that they might be doing that and have less of a need for parking spaces. Is that
is correct?
Correct for me to
And
infer?
it's it's sort of you can see already that there's two sort of sides to this issue, and we're trying to straddle both of them. But it is, in fact, as less parking is available, there's a small, people who are close in become optional drivers. But someone from Geneva is unlikely to become an optional driver. It's a long bike ride, So that's the dilemma, really. And so I think the way to do it is to do these improvements and then find an alternative as well. Keep everybody happy.
Thank you so much.
Right.
So Jerry, the conclusion from your study, the reality is that there isn't a parking problem. At the peak time, you're under the threshold for there being a problem.
I actually believe that, although if I say that out loud, they'll run me out of town probably. But there really are spaces available. The problem is finding them.
Okay, so I think the reality of this study is telling us we do not have a parking problem downtown. We have a signage, we have a finding. Now, if you start adding developments, you start tweaking, potentially that number changes. Yeah. But even by the standard of 85, if we say, hey, we can live with a 90% threshold, there's some, there's some give and take. But I just want to make sure that we're all clear that based on the expert study opinion, we do not have a parking problem in St. Charles right now. At the peak times, based on your study.
Based on the number of spaces, yeah, you don't have.
But that's what the study's based on.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But there's other, you can, some other people.
Right, you take out 100 spots and all of a sudden the number changes.
Yeah,
but if you take out 5, add 10.
That's what I
found. But the study says right
100%.
now. Okay, I'm good.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. First of all, thank you, because this has been a really important study for us, and we've been waiting for this sometimes. And I can tell that you've gotten to know us pretty well as you're you're like, I've listened to a lot of people. I know what people think. But I have some questions that go along with that. And one of them is just to clarify, because I've heard a lot. Your study was based on our intended development as well, like some things that we have coming up. It's not just right now. It's right now in what we, as far as you knew at the time, what we were intending to develop. So thinking about, housing complex on the, the south end there. Okay.
There's 8 or 9 developments that were identified.
Okay, so that's pretty comprehensive. Okay, my second question, and this is, I'd really like your thoughts on this. Excuse me. So parking is very sociological. I mean, there's change management. It's a big part of behavior. You talk about the difference of whether you're talking about parking in Boston, and they expect certain things, and they've learned how to do certain
right.
things. And I know I've had conversations in St. Charles about, the parking that we have on the top floor of the parking deck, and, somebody at the time was saying, well, nobody wants to park up there. I was like, well, wait a second, because that's our parking. And then I also think back to when we put in a new bridge. Nobody was using the Prairie Street Bridge until we had a shutdown. All of a sudden, now people only use the Prairie Street Bridge. Yep. What are your thoughts on the change management required? Because to produce this parking, we have parking out there, but if we're not leading people, and I would think like PR, just things that we can do to help people understand where spaces are, feel comfortable parking there, just because you have control knowing, like, I go up to the 5th floor of the parking deck because I know I can always park and I don't have to worry about it.
You just want to do wheelies up there, I bet.
Yeah, I don't. Nobody, that's not me.
Okay, not you. Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry. Well, I think that the first couple of recommendations that we made really go to that behavior. And I believe that you will find people will be much more comfortable in the First Street garage if they know what floor to go to. I think it is incredibly off-putting, and I'm a garage guy, It's a very bizarre system because you have all these dead-end things. You get off and you have to figure out how to get back. And you got to stop people from having to do that. And so that's the kind of behavior, that helps change their behavior. It takes away an obstacle to using the garage. People say, well, I don't want to go to that garage, it's horrible. I get trapped there in the thing every time, Okay, we're gonna make it so you don't get trapped anymore. In the same thing in the lots, it's a difference. we're going to tell people where the next space is that they can find. So they get in the lot, they don't say, oh, darn it, I can't park here, you know, they either wait till somebody leaves or they go to the next lot. Those are the kind of behavioral changes you'll see, I think, very quickly if you invest in those things. And the third one is, of course, either the app or the website or whatever, you know, electronic notification for people. And, you know, these days, people do everything on their phones. And so in no time at all, they'll be looking and then say, oh, there's this bad, you know, I'm going a lot in. Okay, you know. And I think you'll find that it will make a measurable difference remarkably quickly.
Okay, and I want your opinion on an idea, because I've talked to this, of course you know where I'm going. I've always thought that places like the 5th floor of the parking deck, if we did something to create interest up there, like public art, paint it, something, so you created more density to the space, or just something, it was you know, just something that people would notice, it'd be more thoughtful that there's parking up there, and that would draw them, because I know in retail, you need to have obvious, convenient parking. I'm a supermarket guy.
Yeah.
And whether people use it or not, it has to look like they have obvious parking, regardless if it's easy to park or not.
Yeah.
So what do you think about the idea of creating, you know, interest in places that are kind of underthought about?
Well, it's a good concept. I'm not sure how to do that. I'm not a marketing guy, so but maybe you can figure that out. But there is here's something we haven't really focused on. A lot of garages, if you go downtown, you know, in Chicago downtown, the big garages, multi-levels, they've sort of branded each floor in a different way. There's the poetry garage, which has a poet on each floor, and, you know, or the theater district garage has music from different, you know, people on each floor, so you sort of remember. It's a way to sort of get, it doesn't really draw attention to it because you're already in there, but it makes it a much more comfortable place. It doesn't seem so dreary. But, you know, Evanston, they have a garage sale every year in their garage on a Sunday. And, you know, people rent booths and, you know, it calls them out there, you know.
But the idea of doing some marketing around it, you think that there's some merit to it? Because I think that we have to take some ownership for, like, as a community, helping better understand, because there was a couple places that, I don't know if you said it exactly like this, but the impression that I took is we're using our parking inappropriately. So what that was telling me is we as a community need to figure out how to use our parking more appropriately and communicate that.
I think
if there's some merit to marketing and PR about things, that you think there could be a change that way.
Right. I actually think that if you implement some of the things we've recommended, the first few of them, it might be time to have a big, you know, to-do and really advertise it to people. Say, parking's better now. So all those people who said, oh, I hate going here because of the parking, invite them downtown to try it out, you know?
Right, and even policy changes like employee parking and parking storage.
Right.
We put policies together, but so something comprehensive like that, you think absolutely is going to be what, you know, with the counters and the measures we take.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
So one thing I do want to tell you, just before I quiet, is that I think that you need to have somebody take charge of parking as a daily thing. Not a full-time job, but a daily thing. Somebody in the city who deals with it. Because we come in, you know, now and we're going to go away and, you know, you need someone who's sort of going to follow up with this.
So you're talking like a civil engineer, you're talking enforcement, or?
Somebody, it doesn't matter who it is. It can be anybody. Somebody who cares about parking somewhat. Because parking has this huge range of stuff, as you know. It's marketing, it's accounting, it's you know, it's civil engineering, it's, you know, it's this, it's that, it's the other. It's somebody.
So like a parking manager that handles kind of
yes.
globally.
And it doesn't have to be, again, a full-time job. I don't think it is a full-time job.
Okay.
But someone has to just be pushing you all.
Interesting. Are there any other questions? David?
So, thanks for your presentation, and The recommendations, again, the app, signage, you know, I agree with that. You know, in the report too, you would agree, and it's in writing, obviously, that. And I'm just thinking back to your original point. I'm thinking of parking czar or something that came to my head here. Anyway, Derek, write that down. No, I'm just kidding. So incrementalism.
Yes.
Is that you would say, okay, we don't have a problem if that's what this study is saying. However, there are recommendations to improve it. Would you say, according to what I'm reading, taking incremental steps to improve it is the best way, or what if we could we move too quickly? Is this where this parking czar could?
You can't move too quickly. I mean, I don't think it's really possible to move too quickly.
What's the merits of implementing incremental steps then? Why don't we just do them all at one time?
When you implement, you know, if you do it in steps, you see the impact before you go to the next one.
So the value is?
That's the value.
Yeah, okay.
On the other hand, some of them are completely independent, and so something on the east side is completely independent, relatively independent of the west side. Not entirely, because I believe if you got the garage fixed and more desirable, that east siders would come to the, you know, across the river. But in general, that's the, you know, so if you did some shared parking on the east side, for example, you know, that's independent of what you do on the west side. But I just don't think any of the things that we recommended really require you to wait.
Okay.
I mean, building a garage, I would say wait.
Sure.
Because, well, I don't think you really need it now. I mean, and it's expensive, and there's a lot of, you know, reasons not to do it. But other than that, I do everything else. And tell me next year you've got it done, and we'll come back and count, and we'll prove to you that it's, like, fantastic.
So you don't have any recommendations in terms of, with your experience with other municipalities, like, is there a sweet spot in terms of time? Like, you said next year, so, okay, it sounds like a year.
I mean, realistically, by the time...
What is realistic?
I think a year is real. If you're serious about it, and that's why I said you need to have somebody advocating this.
Sure.
I can't call you up every month and tell you, you know, get it on the agenda to purchase this equipment.
Sure.
That's what you need to do. And it'll take you a couple of months to get bids in, and a couple of months to get the equipment, and, you know, so it's going to, and I don't know how your budgeting process works, so, you know, you got to get that taken care of. So it's going to take you a year to get that in place. But in a year, you should be able to do many of the things. The shared parking stuff can be done in a month, probably.
And see results, you feel?
And you'll see it quickly. And if you call the Arcata and tell them to put this on their website, it ought to be virtually instantaneous, you know, and encourage other people in town to do the same thing. Those kind of things are really quick. Mm-hmm. And the purchasing stuff is, you know, a little longer. But with any energy, you should be able to do this in no time at all.
Steve.
Thank you, Jerry. Appreciate the presentation. I mean, definitely in support of wayfinding signage. Very important to obviously maximize and be efficient with what we currently have.
Yep.
But I definitely, you know, good short-term fixes. I do want all of us to be cognizant of the fact that we do a lot of short-term fixes up here, and that puts us in a not great predicament sometimes. So although this is very manageable and attainable to correct short-term, I still think that, you know, we're not, whether it's 2 years from now, we're not that far away if we want to continue to grow, of this is going to be something that we still have to address down the road. This helps for today, but not for down the road, you know? So.
I had Mark and then? No. Okay. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you. Very good information. I definitely support the signs on the garage. I've parked at O'Hare before, and they do have the signs on every level, how many spots are left. Signage is a good idea. Excellent idea. I just want to talk about your suggestion about metered parking. Where was your recommendation?
Yeah.
And you're recommending, so where would you put it in St. Charles?
So I think from the west, I think we said from the west side of the bridge on Main Street to Third, I forget exactly, I think Third Street. That's the area that is the most occupied. And didn't seem to have as much turnover as we would have expected. Now, I understand the sort of the difficulties with it, and I really do. You know, the other thing you could do is actually enforce the timer.
That was part of my next question, was
Yes.
exactly that.
There's not much enforcement by everyone's admission, and, okay, I get it. But I think, metering somehow, in my mind, that I'm not really, I like metering. I think it's a good way to use the scarce resource. Some would argue it's not quite fair, equitable, because, you know, poor people can't afford to pay as much as rich people can and all that. But other than that, it's a very good mechanism for getting people to decide if they want, if they want to park in this fantastic space, they pay extra. Whereas if otherwise they have to park on one of the cross streets,
So you say going to 3rd Street, would that be in the residential area?
3rd Street and Main Street is what I was saying. I'm sorry, I was saying just on the strip of Main Street and the half a block either side.
Okay.
It shouldn't be in the neighborhood.
No, I thought, that was my one, I just wanted to clarify that.
Someone would say, if I push this further, someone would say, well, gosh, it's just going to discourage people, displace people from Main Street into the neighborhood.
It's very possible, and then,
That's possible.
then you're
You hear
infringing on them.
complaining.
Okay, thank you.
I didn't lead with meters, you'll know.
No, I didn't, and I'm saying, I'm not a fan of meters, I'm really not, for this town. I've done it in Chicago.
But
2 hours.
if you go to the other towns along the Fox River, you will find
I know.
meters.
I understand,
And it's not like people are not coming there.
I completely,
So,
I know, I see.
I just want to,
I'm just not a fan. Now, would you put them by the Arcada Theater?
well, certainly on Main Street, I would. And you could go, and and we were thinking a half a block or so off of Main Street, so it covers, some of it. I don't think you're ready for real meters. I really, serious meters. I would have actually, we considered that a lot.
Okay.
I just don't think you want to do that.
No, I don't. I can only speak for myself. I don't feel like doing, I
Not
don't
you,
have
but
any.
the town. I
Right,
just
well,
don't think you're ready for it.
Okay, that was my, and because if you go to Arcada Theater, you're there more than 2 hours normally. So that's why the meters wouldn't work if you set them at 2 hours.
No, you'd have to set it for longer.
Right.
And then, meters are pretty fancy these days. You can have them variable during times of day and, and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah, I was in Chicago last weekend, and it was $2. It was, when you go to a little center computer and you do it, it's $2.50 an hour, 2 hour maximum.
Yeah.
Now, again, you can program any way you want to.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So I just want to, I'll tie a bow on this. So again, based on the study, if you go out and we sign, because we've had conversations up here about going out and looking at private lots and trying to free up, more space, because there was this concern that, man, we have this big parking problem. But again, based on the study, you don't have a need to run out and sign a bunch of private leases with companies to find 100 more spots. Conversely, if you lose 15 or 20, it's not going to send this study over the edge. We don't, at the present, you don't. Now, you go add a major development or two, that number changes. But short of a couple of moving pieces, it's not going to change your opinion in a study.
Correct.
Thank you.
Right. Would you recommend that the city consider purchasing some of the private lots for parking stability?
If you can control the parking, then you have that much less to worry about, but you don't get development.
Right. But
I have a solution for you there too, is you can, in many places, the city or the parking authority, you know, if they sell a lot, they require the parking to be replaced, not just replaced, but replaced plus the demand, the new demand. You don't do that. You just say...
No, we don't.
Theoretically replace the parking.
Right.
And that basically usurps it for the development, but you can mandate that.
Okay. And then,
I don't know if you want to be in the development business. That's another...
Not really, no. So really the core, those two maps on the west side and the east side, the core is kind of where you want it. That's the busiest times on the weekends, Friday, Saturday nights, where you got it on the map there.
Yeah.
Those are the tightest areas. Outside of that, there's some flexibility. So we kind of want to just keep that on-street parking there, not eliminate 35, 40 spots without any sort of solid alternative. I mean, I just want to make sure we're not removing on-street parking to create a problem in the adjacent neighbors. And it sounds like that's a tight area on the weekend. So like you said, unless there's a solid alternative, it sounds like those should stay until you figure something else out. Is what it
I'll
sounds
let
like.
you take a shot. We've talked about some things. We're getting into some specifics about things that we didn't ask to be studied. And I appreciate it, Jerry. I appreciate you coming up. But you can take that if you want. But let's not. We've asked a lot of great questions. So let's not get into specifics that we didn't ask the consultant to study.
Get yourself a parking czar.
Any other questions?
My final word.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. Moving on. We are at item 4B, recommendation to approve a sales tax sharing agreement with Fox Valley Buick GMC Incorporated. Derek, take it away. Thank you.
All right. So we do have a map up here on my first slide. This is just kind of goes through the subject properties here. In the red, we have the Buick GMC. That's an existing dealership that is operational. And then the blue, we have the former Honda dealership, which relocated to the Pheasant Run property last year. Just showing the usable acreage for both these lots. They are actually bigger, but because of the creek behind them, they are smaller. That kind of plays into why the Honda relocated, because the lot was a little bit too small. Typically, car dealerships are 4 to 5 acres, and as you can see, the usable space for the Buick is also kind of small. And what Buick GMC is looking to do is to purchase the former Honda and basically expand their operations. The reason for this is pretty obvious. This would result in a greater selection of vehicles, and also they would be bringing some of their off-site operations into the new building of the Honda. There is a significant amount of investment that would be required for this, so exterior improvements as well as interior improvements. I do have some of the examples up there: new flooring, new car wash, new lighting system, carpeting, and then this would also be redoing the parking lot. The total investment for this project would be $4 million. One thing I do want to mention quickly, because it does play into the agreement, is kind of the average sales tax that is generated from this property today. So just have the years there from 2020 to 2022. The key number there is that the average is about $245,000. That is annually what we collect in sales tax for the operation as it is today. Project description, essentially this would be an expansion. They would double their inventory, and their sales would be expected to increase by about 30%. This, of course, would result in a greater amount of sales tax for the city. In order to do this project, the developer business is requesting an incentive from the city. This would be in the form of a sales tax sharing agreement. So this is where we have a business that is generating sales tax, and the city will then rebate a percentage of that sales tax back to the developer in order to make the project work financially. The rebate amount that has been suggested or that is in the agreement is 75%. I do have in parentheses there on increment. I'm going to get to that at the end there. The length would be 10 years, and the max rebate would be $160,000. This is where we get to a little bit of a different part of the agreement that staff included, which is a sales tax floor. That's where that number that I showed you before comes into the agreement, the $245,000. So because this is an existing business, they are already generating sales tax for the city. Staff did not want to lose that money. If we just gave a 75% increase on all of the sales tax, then that whole amount would be rebated. We only want to rebate the increment. So basically what we generate from sales tax above that $245,000. In order to make this kind of clear, I did just put up an example here. This would be year one projection. So the projected sales for year one is $267,000. That sales tax floor is $245,000. So the increment would be $22,000. That is what that is the rebatable amount. So 75% of $22,000 is $16,000, and obviously I'm estimating here. So if you were to look at that first year, the city would collect $250,000 in sales tax bill, which would be more than what we're getting today, and then the Buick GMC would get $16,500. Obviously, as time goes on and they generate more and more sales tax or more sales, that number that the Buick GMC is going to get is going to go up. I should also mention just a small note, the sales tax floor increases 3% annually. So the first year is $245,000, but it goes up 3% annually, basically to account for inflation. Overall, the total sales tax generated from this project would be just a little bit over $4 million over the 10 years. The maximum incentive amount would be $860,000. So if they were to outperform their own projections, then they would actually get that same amount, but they would get it sooner, which would be the best case scenario for everyone. The actual sales tax collected after the rebate would be $3.2 million. At the end of 10 years. Similar past agreements, you can look on the far right there, the maximum rebate amount. The last one we did was the Honda that relocated from this building. That max rebate was $5.2 million, and that did not have a sales tax floor attached to it. So the whole amount, even though it was an existing business, the whole amount received that 75% rebate. The most similar agreement that we've done is actually from 2012. It is the St.Charles Toyota, which was an existing car dealership that was basically turned into the Toyota. They received a $1.4 million rebate through the sales tax sharing agreement. It did have a sales tax floor. And then the last one, I just threw this one on because it's a fairly recent one, would be the Volkswagen, which received $1.5 million. That was a new development, so there was no need for a sales tax floor. And at the bottom, you can see just the comparables with the current agreement. Primary benefit of this project is, number one, just the increase in sales tax revenue. Car dealerships are very, very desirable businesses for all communities because they bring in a ton of sales tax. They actually have quite a few employees, and they pay property taxes, of course, and they don't put too much stress on our city services. The average car dealership in St. Charles pulls in about $350,000 in sales tax annually. And generally, and it has gone up a little bit because of inflation and just because of COVID, but we are getting more than $4 million in total sales tax from the city just from car dealerships. So this is actually a significant amount of funds that goes into our general fund, and that's why these are very desirable businesses for communities. Sometimes it does raise eyebrows of people getting these sales tax rebates for car dealerships. This is actually very, very common. CMAP did a study in 2016. They looked at all the sales tax sharing agreements in Illinois and determined 35% of them go to car dealerships, which was by far the highest amount. You can see the blue dots there on the map. That is all sales tax sharing agreements that go to car dealerships. Also, just some other examples in the recent years of other communities. You can see that you have sales tax rebates of $10 million, one had no max, and $8.2 million. There are other benefits, of course, too. This is currently a vacant building that's being underutilized. We'd like to see that put back into use. Property taxes will go up whenever it is an occupied building. The car dealership, of course, will enhance the streetscape and overall aesthetics along Main Street. Certainly hasn't looked great to have a vacant building there. And then the Buick GMC employs about 42 workers today. They will actually have an additional 11 to 13 new employees coming on board with the expansion. And then, of course, we'll solidify the Fox Valley Auto Group's commitment to the St. Charles community, who own a couple of dealerships and are also very active. With that, before I take questions, there is a representative from Fox Valley Auto Group, just to say a few words.
Welcome. Please just state your name before beginning.
Sure. Good evening. My name is Scott Richmond. I'm from the law firm of Ariano Hardy Ritt. I'm here tonight with Amir Abinian, who is the owner of the Fox Valley Auto Group, including Fox Valley Buick GMC. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I do want to thank Derek Connolly in working with him and the mayor and working with her on this project. St. Charles has been very accommodating in working with us, but they really made us sharpen our pencils with regard to this. I will tell you that originally when we started talking with the city, my client was looking for a larger incentive, and they really honed it down to all of the improvements that will ultimately benefit the city, and we arrived at this number of $860,000 as the top benefit, and both sides are happy with that. So we appreciate the opportunity to do this, and I think what you've seen, what Derek said tonight, is that this will expand the capabilities of the Fox Valley Buick GMC. It will add employees to the city. It will add revenues to the city and allow for the expansion of the business. I will tell you they've already added 8 employees operating as part of this new building. So you're already seeing the benefits of this. Certainly open to any questions here, but just understand that the idea here is to add inventory for the dealership so that they can sell more cars, so more cars can park in your parking spots, and to bring more jobs and to continue to be an active part of the community. I think it's easy to tell that Amir Abinian has been an integral part of this community for a long time, and he's eager to continue to do so and keep his businesses in town and benefiting the city of St. Charles. So I'll leave it with that. If you have any specific questions, I'm happy to answer them, or Amir, if I cannot.
Right.
First of all, thank you for your ongoing commitment to invest in our community. Appreciate that. So just one question with the improvements. What's the timeline on it? Is it like 6 months, a year, 2 years? What are you looking at with that?
A lot of them are already in place. I think in the packet you had some before and after pictures when the Honda dealership moved out, and now you see a lot of the improvements are already in place. So it's up and running. There's still some more improvements to do interior-wise, but for the most part, it's well underway.
Okay.
Other questions, comments?
Move for approval.
Second.
Moved by Wirball, second by Petrella. All in favor, roll. Oh, go ahead and we'll call the roll.
Weber?
Yes.
Sokaitis?
Yes.
Folks?
Yes.
Bongard?
Yes.
Munn?
Yes.
Petrilla?
Yes.
Wirball?
Yes.
Bessner?
Yes.
Thank you. That passes unanimously. Next up, we have C, recommendation to approve plat of vacation and plat of easement for 2651 East Main Street.
Good evening. A plat of vacation and easement have been submitted as required for improvements associated with the Toyota dealership expansion project located at 2651 East Main Street. The plat of vacation has been provided to vacate a existing detention easement and then an unused water main and sanitary easement. And then on top of that, a plat of easement has been filed to cover the modified detention area. Our civil engineer has taken a look at it and has decided that the modified easement would meet the requirements for the detention. Construction is underway with this project, and the plats are required to be recorded prior to the city granting final occupancy. So with that, I can kind of turn it over for any questions.
Any questions? Are you looking for motion?
Move for approval.
Second.
Moved by Wirball, seconded by Baumgart. Please call the roll.
Weber?
Yes.
Kulkaitis?
Yes.
Folks?
Yes.
Bongard?
Yes.
Munns?
Yes.
Petrula?
Yes.
Wirball?
Yes.
Fessner?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you, that passes. So next up, we have item D, consideration to request to amend the natural area easement at 818 Fox Glen Drive. Thank you.
Thank you. We have received a request from Muhammad Choudhury, the owner of the property at 818 Fox Glen Drive, to modify the natural area easement in his rear yard. The property is in the woods of Fox Glen subdivision. The rear yards within that subdivision are encumbered by a natural area easement, which restricts removal of trees and shrubs and restricts any construction or improvements within the easement area. The lot is 280 feet deep, and the easement covers the rear 100 feet. The request is to reduce the easement by 60 feet to provide a usable space in the rear of the house. The applicant intends to construct a patio with pergola and hot tub, walkway, and swing set. He intends to keep all trees over 4 inches in diameter. The city has previously approved reducing the natural area easement on other lots in this subdivision to allow space for installation of improvements like swimming pools and patios. The proposed reduction would allow for a usable area of the backyard, which would be similar in depth to other nearby lots in the subdivision.
Thank you. Other questions, David?
So, I mean, in general, I'm not in favor of granting this, of course, but in the memo, I mentioned the suggested items, the scaling back of the improvements, and now in the plat or the information in our packet here, what was that about 30 feet rather than 60? Is that what staff's recommending? There's a scaled back recommendation. It wasn't in the actual memo, but I think it was in the plat. Because I would be in favor of that, the scaled back number. I think it's 30 feet.
Sorry, I'm not sure where you're seeing.
Well, in the memo, it says that,
yeah, if I can interject. I think one of the options that was offered that has been part of previous approvals for natural area easement reductions is to scale back the easement reduction basically to the area where the improvements are being proposed. So there's a diagram that shows what's being proposed to construct, and so if there was interest in scaling it back to basically fit the footprint of what's being proposed, that would be a reduced area. I don't know if it's exactly 30 feet, but a plat would have to be prepared showing that distance.
Okay, again, it's in the recommendation section at the bottom. I would be in favor of doing that, whatever that is, so.
Right.
Yeah, I'm fine with it, so I think unless anybody else has anything to say, I'd make a motion to approve with staff's recommendation that the easement be scaled back to the proposed improvements only.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to approve moving the easement to a distance that will be satisfying staff, that is only covering the proposed
to the improvements.
Leaving the proposed only improvements. There we go. Good? All right, that's the motion, and I have the second. Call the roll, please.
Weber?
Yes.
Kulkaitis?
Yes.
Folks?
Yes.
Bongard?
Yes.
Munns?
Yes.
Petrula?
Yes.
Wirball?
Yes.
Fessner?
Yes.
Thank you, that motion passes. So we're on to the presentation regarding affordable housing policy. We're going to handle all of them. You're just going to make a presentation, and then we'll handle the next 3 of them.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Take it away.
Didn't want to delay Russ. Yes, good evening. So this presentation, it's part of our yearly update regarding affordable housing and affordable housing data. Annually, we present to the P&D committee an affordability analysis, an update on the city's housing trust fund, and potential adjustments to our fee and lieu amount that we collect. So we'll be having Ellen present those after I provide this introduction. But we've also kind of expanded the scope a little bit with this year's presentation because we have the IDA report, which they issue every 5 years, that identifies the city's affordable housing level according to the state based on their official metrics. And we also have information in our strategic plan that discusses potentially revisiting some of our affordable housing requirements.
Pardon me 1 second. Folks, I appreciate, it's hard to hear. Excuse me, in the front row. It's hard to hear. If you need to have discussion, we have some rooms that are available, if that'd be all right. Thank you, Russ. I'm sorry.
Yes, so it's part of the balanced and thoughtful development priority to encourage the development of diverse and quality housing options. And as I mentioned, one of those outcome objectives is this year to revisit and potentially revise affordable housing requirements if required. So briefly, just to kind of cover what our affordable housing programs and policies are, since these will be discussed in a little more detail with the subsequent slides. But we have an inclusionary housing ordinance, which is part of the city code, that requires 10% of units in new residential projects to be affordable. The city has the option to collect fee in lieu. For larger projects that are presented to the city council, that's ultimately been a policy decision when the project's being presented based on what the developer's interest is, whether there would be an interest in having the units provided or accepting a fee. The fee in lieu amount is set on a yearly basis by the city council based on advice of the Housing Commission. They've come up with a formula that they have recommended be utilized. That fee really is set at a high enough level to try and encourage units to be constructed as opposed to the fee being paid. And we also, through the code, offer incentives of waivers of other fee requirements to try and encourage affordable units to be constructed. We have a housing trust fund that collects those fee in lieu payments and reimbursements to the program through loans. And that fund is there to both maintain and to provide new affordable units. So that includes programs that provide grants to affordable unit owners, which is first-time home buyer and home rehab programs that we have, and grants to developers of affordable units. And this could be through participation in the Kane County Affordable Housing Fund, where a developer could apply for Housing Trust Fund money, which is pooled with other money that the county has available. So we're talking about affordability. We use the affordable housing definition that's set by the state, the Housing Development Authority, and their act that they enforce, the Affordable Planning and Appeal Act, which directs municipalities to create programs or enact policies to try and achieve at least 10% of all housing as affordable. This slide includes some data of our local St. Charles analysis and the state's numbers based on the last 3 5-year reports that have been issued. You can see based on the St. Charles numbers and our local data sources, we've seen the affordability trending down versus the state has released a report recently that would suggest that our affordability is on par with what it was in 2018. Some comments on this. We think the data that we use locally is more accurate because it's based on township data that we utilize for housing values, and we also check rental rates at apartment complexes to determine if those rates are actually affordable. The state's data uses a lot of assumptions to try and estimate using sort of general available and some census data. A couple other comments. The affordability numbers in recent years, even though housing prices have been rising, incomes have risen significantly in the region, which has caused the numbers to be maintained or increased. We've seen the amount of affordable rentals that we have in St. Charles have dropped, despite us constructing new rental units that are coming online. Affordability has also been impacted by inflation and interest rates in the past couple of years, so the actual cost that's experienced by residents maybe is not exactly reflected in some of these measurements. And looking to the future, it's hard to predict how all these trends will work together. There's obviously regional and national economic trends that influence this, but we think that the city is a desirable location within the Chicago region, and the supply really is constrained in terms of available units, and so that's likely to drive up increases in housing costs in the future. So at the policy level, in terms of what we have in place right now, so historically, the city has supported having affordable housing programs in place as a city-adopted policy, and this is separate from the state having any kind of mandate. It's something that the city initiated before the state imposed anything. We've had requirements that have been in the code and enforced in projects starting in the mid-2000s. We are still unique within the area having affordable housing requirements in our code. Some of our closest neighbors that have programs right now still only have voluntary standards and incentives, and the two most local ones are Geneva and Naperville that have voluntary and incentive programs. So with recent projects, the city has accepted quite a bit of fee in lieu payment. This has been a developer preference primarily because most of the developers that we've worked with either don't have an interest in owning and managing these units, or it complicates how they finance their project, and they're unable to complete the project with the affordable units in it. And the city has been willing, the developers have been willing to pay the fee, and the city's been willing to accept the fee. Because of that, with recent projects, we've seen the Housing Trust Fund increase significantly. We now have $2.16 million in the fund, and we're projecting $2.56 million in the fund once all of the current projects that are under construction are built out and pay into the fund. And our attempts to convert these funds into units has been challenging, which we'll discuss some examples. But some of the qualification limitations on homeowners and houses where these grants are being requested has limited the pool of applicants. And large projects are still reliant on the state's low-income housing tax credit program, which has been scaled back from what it used to be, and it's gotten more competitive. We have the Anthony Place 2 project, which you may be familiar with, that the city had granted or offered a significant amount of our trust fund to support, but they ultimately didn't receive the state tax credit, so that project is not proceeding as of yet. So it's become a little more competitive for larger projects. And when we're looking to the future, we've spoken to the Housing Commission, and Ellen will provide some more information on this, but they are recommending that the city try to get affordable units constructed with larger projects. So this would be larger multifamily projects. Some sites that were suggested is if the Charlestown Mall redevelops with residential use, or the Britcher Commons property behind Meyer, if that was to develop with residential use. But those are potential project sites where, because they're multifamily, it'd be easy to incorporate affordable units. There's also the option of a developer partnering with an affordable housing provider. So the Prairie Center project, the Anthony Place development that's there, was an affordable housing developer who constructed it within the project site. So that was a model where a developer brought in a partner. And it's important to keep in mind that if we impose these requirements going forward on projects, it may discourage or prevent certain developers from pursuing a project. So that's always a potential outcome of trying to enforce the affordable requirement. On the other hand, if we continue to accept mostly fee in lieu, we need to acknowledge that it's going to be the city's responsibility to find ways to try to convert these funds into maintaining or providing affordable units. As I mentioned, that's been a challenge. One option that's available is to try and allocate more of these funds to the county's program to help assist with larger projects. And again, their programs they have funding available. It's not as competitive, but because most of the large projects that go through their process also want the state tax credit, it does become somewhat competitive. But potentially, if we see one of those projects go through that's of a larger scale, that can use a large amount of the fund that we have available. That was kind of a thought with the Anthony Place 2 project. The other thing to consider is that our affordable housing fees are viewed, because we typically accept the fee, they're viewed as part of the development impact fee. So they're almost like a line item that a developer looks at in terms of costs that's going to incur to develop a project. And because the housing fee is unique to St. Charles, at least among our immediate neighbors, it is viewed as sort of an added or uncommon fee that's figured into the formulas for what's paid. And when it's paid as a fee, it's kind of looked at together with all the other fees that we collect. So the school park fees, utility connection fees, and the county transportation fees that are collected. And these fees that we take in, because the Housing Trust Fund has limitations on how the funds can be utilized, there's not a lot of options of ways to utilize these fees unless we're dealing with affordable units or affordable purchasers. And that limits our ability as to how these funds are used. And also having a substantial fee in place limits our ability to potentially collect other fees for other purposes because it's all part of sort of the bottom line of fees that are collected. And so that's important to keep in mind if we're going to ever consider any additional impact fees. So these are some questions on policy feedback. Really, this is kind of an initial discussion and not necessarily needing to have conclusions tonight, but we've identified in the strategic plan reassessing some of our requirements for 2024. So looking ahead to the next 5 years, do we want to approach some of these larger projects by saying we're expecting affordable units to be provided? That's something that staff would need to communicate to developers as we're approached by projects to try and encourage that to be part of the discussion. Or are we okay continuing to accept these large fee in lieu amounts for projects? And should we try and gear our programs to try and spend those fee in lieu amounts more aggressively than we have in the past? Alternately, would we want to look at potentially replacing some portion of the affordable housing fee with some alternate development fee? And we don't necessarily have a concept of what this would be, but these could be fees that could support other types of housing options to encourage housing diversity, not just funding affordable units per the state definition, but other types of units, or potentially some other impact fee to offset other development-related costs that the city absorbs that maybe are indirectly causing housing to be less affordable. So there's options to explore in that category. And so I think there I'll stop and I'll turn it over to Ellen to kind of walk through a little bit more information, and we'll come back to this policy discussion.
Thanks, Russell. Ellen?
Hello. Okay. So each year, staff prepares an analysis of the affordable housing situation in St. Charles. This is done to inform city decisions regarding housing policies and programs and to track the city's standing with respect to the state's Affordable Housing Planning and Appeals Act, which requires communities to have a housing stock that is at least 10% affordable. As Russ touched on, affordable housing is defined as housing that has a sales amount or rental amount that is within the means of a household that is at or below 80% of the area median income for owner-occupied and 60% AMI for rental units. So to be considered affordable, housing costs cannot exceed 30% of the household's income. The affordability analysis details the methodology used by staff to collect our affordable housing, to calculate our affordable housing share, but in total, 12.9% of our housing stock is considered affordable. This is based on 2022 housing values from the township assessor, and then 2023 rental rates collected from our various apartment communities. Housing affordability is down from 17% last year. The decrease in affordability is a reflection of recent rent increases and home values outpacing incomes. On the ownership side, 13.2% of units are affordable, which is down from 17.3% last year. Staff does expect owned housing affordability to continue to fall in coming years if the current trends of the housing market characterized by limited supply and high prices continue. And then on the rental side, 12.2% of units are affordable. That's down from 16% last year. The supply of market rate rentals continues to grow as build-out continues at Prairie Center and the Springs development, and a decrease in the rental affordability rate is expected to continue, and if the current trend of increasing rents also continues. We lost a number of affordable units in the past few years, and we expect that to continue, unfortunately. So this past December, IDA, Illinois Housing Development Authority, released its 2023 statewide report on local government affordability. This report is released by IDA every 5 years, and it lists each municipality's affordable housing share, which IDA then uses that number to determine each community's compliance with the Affordable Housing Planning and Appeals Act. So according to the report, 17.2% of St. Charles housing stock is affordable. That's consistent with the IDA's finding back in 2018 of 17.1%. St. Charles, then, since we are over 10% of affordable, we are considered an exempt local government. So this means we do not need to submit an affordable housing plan to the state, and we are not subject to appeals to the State Housing Appeals Board. So a developer that proposes affordable housing and is denied zoning entitlements for the project, if we were non-exempt, they could then appeal our zoning decision to the state. But we are not subject to that, since we are above 10% affordable. So the next update is expected in 5 years. So similar to past years, our staff finding of 12.9% affordable differs to the states. We're lower, and Russ touched on the differences. Basically, it relates to the data points used and the data sources used for the calculations, but we do believe that our finding at 12.9% more accurately reflects the affordability situation in St. Charles due to the fact that we use more localized data and more exact data as opposed to census estimates. So this report is provided for information. I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, so that's a lot to go through. We're not going to be forced to do anything by the state because the state's level is at 17. We believe that we may have a problem. We need to kind of pay attention to that. And some of our housing stock has moved from the affordable level kind of past that recently. And you want some feedback on our housing fees and policy. Okay, I got Ron first.
Thank you. So I notice we're on a downward trend for affordable housing, which we need to correct that. Okay, I want to make St. Charles somewhat affordable. So therefore, I am in favor of, we're not to that point yet, are we? What I'm in favor of. But speaking of this, I do believe we've had this discussion before, and 12.9 versus what we were before, we're just a little bit over 10, okay? We need to bring that back up as much as we can. Now, can I speak on what we just talked about before?
Sure, go. Floor's yours.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, I should say, we were going to come back to those policy questions at the end once we...
Okay, no, I'll wait to the end.
Okay.
No problem.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question on one of the options that was presented. I would like to understand more when you say pursuing other types of units and expanding housing diversity, what exactly does that mean?
I think we don't necessarily have an answer to that question yet, other than if there's direction to kind of explore ability to take in a fee that we would have more ability to use on different types of units. Right now it's restricted specifically to affordable units that meet the definition under the state act because it's collected through our trust fund, which is based on those requirements.
So there's a difference of opinion apparently from our data and the state. So 10%, so 12.9 is closer to 10% than 17. What if our data says, we dip below 10%, but the state, are we compelled then to submit that report? And what's going to happen if that scenario happens?
No, we do this report of our own accord. The state doesn't require us to track this. It's been our practice to do so. But if we find that our numbers fall below 10%, that's kind of an indication to us that likely our number will fall in the next report issued by the state in 5 years, but maybe not to the same degree.
And then also, can you refresh my memory when we, you mentioned, I almost called you Derek, sorry, Russ, that we would be responsible if we decided to take a policy decision to accept more fees to spend that money. We could give it to the states or the county, the county's funding. We don't have control over that, correct? If you give it to Kane County, it could be potentially spent in Elgin or. Is that right?
No, so any funds that we contribute from our housing trust fund must be spent in St. Charles.
Okay, great. But we still have that sort of, that's a, I don't know, quote unquote, not a burden, but that we have to still track that if we decide to go down that route. Is that what to your point, Russ? That's like.
Well, I think we have some obligation because we're collecting the fees for this purpose to ensure that we're making the funds available and making use of the funds to generate the units, because that was really the intent. So, the larger that amount gets and the more we continue to take in as fees, the more onus it is on us to figure out ways to utilize those
Because
funds.
we're stewards of that funding. Got it. Thank you.
Can we not repurpose that money for something else? It has to go towards this housing, right? So, silly question, you can't move that, nobody's utilizing, nobody's applying for it, you can't repurpose that into something else?
No, not the existing money that we have taken in under the current programs.
Could you redo the program moving forward to say, if nobody's applying to utilize this for this specifically, the city is able to turn around and do something else with it?
So we would have to look at kind of splitting out the housing fee from some other type, the affordable housing fee from some other type of fee, and have some different program requirements as to what that fee was being taken in for. That's something that we could explore if there's an interest from the community to do that, but it would kind of involve separating our current fee into the affordable housing fee and some other type of impact fee that we'd have to determine what that is.
So it sounds like a yes. You could, I mean, you could, right?
But our existing funds that we've taken in are limited to how they can be spent based on the current program.
So I'll just make this comment because I know other people want to jump in. So I don't think there's a person up here who doesn't want to support and pursue attainable housing and what it means to a community like this. But when you look at, you have a housing commission, you have a desire for this type of development, you have a trust, and you still have developers coming in saying, no, we'll do X. The part that we don't have mass transportation, we don't have a train station. There's been some debate about what percentage of people who live in St. Charles work in St. Charles. And I just want, yes, we want to, achieve this, have a competitive, affordable, attainable housing. But short of that for this body, I'm not sure what else, so if this is a question of, well, should we keep collecting these fees? I mean, yes, I think you should if we can find a way to repurpose them. If nobody wants to use them specifically for this, if there's a way that we can put it towards other things that will benefit the community. But this just seems like such a big question of, do you want this, and then how do you obtain it? I'm not sure, how do we get there?
Yeah, and that might be a good point to move into the next section about the Housing Trust Fund.
Jamie?
We can come back to it.
Yeah.
So you were not,
Paul, I got one.
hang on a second, I had Jamie,
Oh,
but I
I'm
think
sorry,
she
Jamie.
doesn't want time, and then I got Steven,
You can come back to me after they.
Steve?
No, they can just keep on presenting, and then I'll ask them at the very end.
I can wait.
Okay, thank you. So Russ touched on and we've been discussing the Housing Trust Fund, but I wanted to touch on kind of the current programs and the current uses we have for the fund. As Russ said, the balance of the fund is right now $2.1 million, and this includes recent large contributions from new residential developments on the east side. So the city offers 3 programs funded by the trust fund. We have the Home Rehab and Accessibility Loan Program, which is an interest-free loan for income-eligible homeowners to make necessary repairs on their home. First-time homebuyer program is also interest-free loan for income-eligible home buyers looking to purchase a home in St. Charles. And then our most significant use of the fund is through the Kane County Affordable Housing Fund. So the city has contributed a significant portion of our trust fund to be made available to developers through this county fund. So developers apply through Kane County for county CDBG and home funds, and for St. Charles Housing Trust Fund if the project is in St. Charles. So this slide shows the projects that have been funded by the trust fund. We have issued 6 home rehab loans since the program started in 2011. The usage of this program hasn't been great. Basically, the program is subject to, loan recipients are subject to a home value limitation, so the value of the home cannot exceed a certain number. There also are income, you must be income eligible to qualify for the program. So we've seen low usage, but that program continues to be out there. We've contributed funding to purchase rehab projects on Dean Street and Adams Avenue, and a new construction home on Moore Avenue. And these homes were all sold in recent years to income-eligible buyers. The city has also approved funding for 2 more projects which are pending. Russ touched on the Anthony Place 2 project, which we approved $1.1 million, and then $115,000 to Habitat for Humanity for a new house project on Dean Street. And I wanted to touch on also Anthony Place 2, the update that Russ shared. This was a 60-unit affordable senior apartment building. GC Housing Development is the developer. The city contributed $1.1 million along with a county $1.1 million contribution. And this was really the most significant use of the Housing Trust Fund to date. I know the Housing Commission was very excited about it. It was going to be a good project for a town. But they did require low-income housing tax credits from the state, and they were not approved for this funding cycle. I believe that they were close. They scored well, but it's a competitive program. The developer indicated they're still interested in doing a project in St. Charles, but they haven't located they don't have a location identified. So we'll see where that goes. So kind of going back now to future use of the trust fund, the Housing Commission recently has been discussing kind of a desire, this is not a recent desire, but they've been discussing the fact that, we have had a history of accepting fee in lieu for large developments, and there's a preference for providing affordable units as opposed to accepting the fee. So as I said, the city has partnered with King County to make trust funds available to developers for construction of affordable housing. A developer who does provide the units could, in theory, then apply for trust fund dollars to also help pay for the cost of building those units. For example, redevelopment of the Charlestown Mall may present an opportunity for an affordable housing component. The affordable units could be constructed by the mall developer and scattered among the market rate units, or they could partner with an affordable housing developer to provide units in standalone buildings similar to Anthony Place at Prairie Center. And then housing trust funds could be awarded in either case for those physical units. There's also potential for affordable housing developers to apply for trust fund resources for standalone projects like Anthony Place 2. So that money remains available, and the county issues an annual call for projects where developers can apply for those funds. They do that typically in the summer months. And then we also have our home rehab and first-time home buyer programs, which have seen low usage, but those programs are still available. So welcome feedback and discussion on the policy questions.
Thank you so much for that. I have a question actually about the standalone, because that sounds different than what you're saying when you say Anthony Place. So I guess I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to encourage smaller builders to create smaller scale incremental housing that maybe blends in with neighborhoods, that is more of the starter home type unit that is a multifamily housing, like a duplex, fourplex, condo that looks like a home that fits into neighborhoods that would be then more in that attainable housing area.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and those types of developers can apply for housing trust funds through the county's program. Okay. And for example, the two houses that have been the purchase rehab projects that have happened over the past few years on the east side, that's a developer, a private developer who has a mission to provide affordable housing. They take on these projects, purchase distressed homes, and then rehab them and resell them to income-eligible buyers. And I believe that there's zoning limitations on the number of units. So in theory, for example, the city-owned lot on Dean Street that we decided to donate to Habitat, the zoning only allows a single-family home there. So I think I would definitely support that. It's a question of, obtaining the property and having appropriate zoning and getting a developer to propose it.
Right. Okay. And then my other question is, can we evaluate the repayment requirements on the HTF? Because my understanding is that's for the lifetime of the ownership. And I don't know if that's a barrier for some people or a deterrent for them, that they know they have to repay this when they leave that home. And if someone is going to be there for 15 or 20 years, isn't that showing the investment to the city in that time frame, that if they have stayed for that amount of time, should that not be enough time for them to not have to repay or something like that?
Yeah, it's like a forgivable loan.
Right.
Yeah, no
where
sewage
we,
is-
we
yeah.
set a limitation, instead of it being a lifetime, like if they stay there for 50 years and then they sell it, they have to repay that. It seems like a barrier to me, or at least a hindrance.
Yeah, we can look at that. Our program does piggyback on the county's program, so basically the county funds come in first, and then if additional funds are needed, then the city funds kick in. So we're kind of wrapped into the county's eligibility and program requirements. But maybe we could look into something, like if they do have St. Charles money, then that part could be forgiven.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Dave? Yes, Paul, thank you. Russell, is the Anthony Place project, is it salvageable in any way? Like, could we kick in more money, or is there a way to salvage that?
I would say it's not an issue of our money. I think the project only works with the state tax credit. So I think they are willing to still do the project if they can find a location. You know, I think our money is still available the way we've allocated it, but I think it's contingent on the state.
Okay, then, follow-up question would be, so I'm definitely not in favor of removing the fee in lieu. I think it's leave it up to the developer, to either, you know, build or pay. But it just seems like maybe we have to make some adjustments to maybe some of the criteria, to allow more people to be able to use the funds. It just doesn't seem like they're being utilized very well, which means the standards are probably a little bit too strict right now, you know? Not a question, that was just a comment.
Mark? I got a question when we look at some of the apartments and the rent, and I think that's one aspect that makes it kind of difficult. Is there anything that can be done, or is just how it is right now? Because you said we're kind of losing some places due to that, but I look at some of the new places that are coming up, and you look at some of the rents there, and they're more than many of our mortgages. So it's becoming very frustrating to try to attract and keep and get people maybe here, mind some other things, but with some of these newer places that are being built and are advertising online, hey, 2024 we're opening, and then you go look at the rent. How does that factor into all this as well, helping us get to where Ron was talking about, like a way to fix it? Because I feel like we're going in those places the complete opposite direction, maybe not by our control, but is there anything we can do to help cradle it back in?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because obviously market rate developments, they're not subject to any sort of restrictions on how high they can go for their rents. But if they were to have provided 10% affordable units within that development, then those units at least would be restricted. But otherwise, we don't really have any control over that, unfortunately.
Okay. So in the future, though, with those places, we could say 10% just to have that in there for people. We haven't in the past, though. But have we tried and they've said, no, we'd pay the fee, or how has that worked?
Yeah, I mean, in the recent past, the developers have proposed to pay the fee, and that's been accepted.
Thank you.
Right.
So, first of all, it sounds like we have a need for more affordable housing. I mean, the local data that we're using suggests that, right? So, for me, I think there's a great opportunity at Charlestown Mall to have a component of that be affordable housing, or at least affordable senior housing. I'm big on affordable senior housing because, you know, a lot of our senior residents are losing their house, like in River Glen Retirement Community. Not necessarily affordable housing, but it's not super expensive, kind of in the middle. I'm hearing things about Carroll Tower. Things going on there, we can discuss it another time. That's affordable housing, but maybe they're doing something there to change what that is in the future. So I'm a big proponent of affordable housing or senior housing at Charlestown Mall. I think it's a great opportunity to have a component of that. I know it's under contract with the developer. Maybe that's a conversation to have now with them. Maybe Anthony Place too. They're looking for a new location according to this. Maybe that's a place for them to go and inquire. The housing fee, I'm in favor of the recommendation, the 2024 inclusionary housing fee that the Housing Commission is recommending. I'm fine with that. I don't have an issue with it. But I think Charlestown Mall is really a great opportunity to have a component of that. And I think, you know, everything you're doing, I don't know how we incentivize that, or we go through the county, or we work with that current developer, but I'd like to see something happen over there. Also, what is the, online we have what's called a home rehab and accessibility loan program. Could you, and that sounds like that's part of the housing program. Could you speak to that a little bit, and how often is that used, and how much money have we provided, maybe over the last couple years?
Yes, so that program began in 2011, and since then we've issued 6 rehab loans. The funds used are about $61,000. It hasn't been used very often. It's difficult to qualify because there are limitations on the value of the home, and then there's limitations on the homeowner's income as well. That is a piggyback program to Kane County. So Kane County has basically the same program requirements. They offer $20,000 for home rehab assistance, and then the city kicks in an additional $10,000 if additional funds are needed for the project. So the county has done other loans throughout Kane County, their program area. In St. Charles, we've only contributed to 6 of those, the ones in St. Charles.
Because I was just looking at, there's other things in there besides loans and things. It talks about ramps, chair lifts, bathroom modifications, like kind of like ADA type things. Do we, I'm not really sure if we market a lot or whatever, but do we have a lot of inquiries about that, or is that kind of a separate?
Yeah, so, well, just to clarify also, since Kane County's funding goes up to $20,000, and a lot of those accessibility type improvements might fall under that.
Okay.
The county, and I can get a number from them, it's likely they've issued other loans in St. Charles. We just haven't had to contribute to those. But in terms of marketing, the Housing Commission has discussed this quite a bit, and we use an organization called Community Contacts. It's a nonprofit out of Elgin. They administer the program, they coordinate the contractors, they screen applicants, they do everything, and it's really a capacity issue for them. They are a small organization and a limited number of contractors they work with, so the rehab projects that they have coming from elsewhere in the county, they wouldn't be able to do any more in St. Charles, even if we were able to identify more applicants.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. What is your definition of a large development? How many units? Do we have a number for that?
You know, I don't think we do, but I would say one that typically is large enough that they could potentially set aside an area for affordable units and still be able to viably develop the rest of the project.
Okay, I was just curious. And then I think if we're going to go, if a large development comes in, I would like basic to insist that they have to provide units on site versus fee in lieu. I think we probably should have done that before for some of these big developments. So I take fault with that myself, but I would like to see us make sure that they do provide units on site, and if they do build them, you cannot tell from the outside that they're affordable units. We've had that discussion, I know, before about that. And I'll just jump to the next one. I'm in favor of the Housing Commission recommendations that we increase the fees. I think they're needed so we can help these developers that, with the large projects that do want to provide affordable housing, we can help them do that, because it's cheaper for them to build a big development, big apartment unit or whatever, versus to build small individual ones. So I think we get more money's worth if we would go with a large project, but require them to build. Now, that's my opinion, but I would definitely support that. Thank you.
Thank you. To add to what Ron said about having units that are indistinguishable from other units, it's my understanding that when you do affordable housing, that it shouldn't be a set-aside area, as you mentioned, that those should be intermingled with the other areas of housing. Is that accurate?
Correct. That is the goal, and that's the stated design requirement in the code, but we have allowed that to be deviated from for specific projects where the set-aside model made more sense, but that's not the ideal for how the requirement's set up.
Okay. I was just wondering why that was called out specifically there.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, I think it's really our only examples of units being successfully incorporated into new developments have been through set-aside methods.
Why is that?
I think it's challenging to incorporate the affordable units into a market rate buildings and kind of mix them together based on how the buildings are designed. It adds some additional costs to accommodate and lost square footage within a building. They're figuring in the rental rates and the financing. It kind of throws off the model of how the projects are designed. It isn't to say that's impossible, but it's been a challenge, I think, for the developers who've looked into that option in St. Charles.
Even when it's one builder, when it's one project and, you know, one budget, they can't mix that.
I think they can. It's just that once they start converting units within a building of all market rate units, it kind of throws off their formulas and their footprints of the units. And it makes it more complicated. Doesn't mean it's impossible to do, but it's more complicated.
So it is something we could ask of them?
Yes.
Okay.
And my comments, to take a look at this, you know, and I've been pretty involved with this since the beginning, is, you know, we charge this fee, and it kind of hasn't worked that well. I mean, we've gotten some projects where you develop some affordable units, and I know, you know, when First Street was done, I've had employees that lived in some of the affordable units there, but I think we need to better understand why it hasn't worked. You know, because I think that just charging the fee, although I'm not in favor of moving it right now, I think that we have to better understand why aren't they being built? Like, what do we have to do? And you talked about creativity and housing stock and recommendations, and we're not approving anything today. We're just giving recommendations and you bring things back, right? Well, I think we need more expertise because, you know, I've been around it a lot, and I still, and from the other day we were talking, like, what do we have to do to get, I think we need better information and better guidance, expert guidance on how to make sure if we're going to charge and impact this affordable housing fee, why are people choosing it? Why is it so much easier to choose it rather than build it because we're not accomplishing our goal? I mean, we didn't really intend to just charge money.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to the fact that our code has the option in there to request the fee, and the city's been receptive to accepting the fee. And because that's an easier solution, and maybe our fee isn't high enough to push them to do it. It may be as simple as that.
Hey, I'd like to hear more back about that, though. I don't know. I mean, if more fees is the solution, but I don't want to get to a spot where we're ignoring the market either.
Yeah, so I would say, you know, it comes down to how we impose this regulation, which is, I think, kind of the first question of, do we impose the requirement to provide the fees, and do we require the units to be integrated into the buildings? It's an option. It's called for under our code, but, you know, there would have to be the support to proceed with enforcing that on a project.
Just me personally, I also want to understand, know that as we do move forward, I don't want to take a risk of damaging the market while still getting what we're looking for. Because I do believe that what we've been doing, I think it just shows we didn't intend to collect all this money. People might have chosen it, but that wasn't the goal. The goal was to provide affordable housing. And I'd like to better understand just really why we have it and how we can. Have you gotten the information that you need from us today?
I mean, I have some comments.
Yeah, I wanted to.
I guess I'm visible over.
Yeah, David, then.
I agree with my colleagues. Just keep it simple. I support what the Housing Commission recommendation on the 11th. I would also probably state, I would guess, and I defer to you, Russ, that again, the ease of payment is probably at the heart of maybe why that is, we've collected so much money, but I digress. Maybe if you want to can you do a survey or something and find out why some of these developers decide to pay instead of putting in units? But regardless, I also think, to Jamie's point, I mean, if they're set aside, that kind of defeats the purpose. I mean, we don't want to It sounds uncomfortable to me to like start segregating people, and I don't like that idea. So I would say let's push for integration.
Yeah, the only comment on, on the set aside and the benefit of that is that the potential to bring in an affordable housing developer into a project for a market rate project developer that wouldn't otherwise provide those units.
Right. Just to piggyback off what Councilmember Bongard was saying, he started to ask the question of what kind of opportunities there might be to use these funds in a different way, and you kind of gave that look like it might be challenging, but is there a realistic direction on using these funds in different avenues? Or can you come back with suggestions like that?
Yes, we can come back with suggestions like that if that's something that's of interest. I think there's a few comments, so that it's something we can bring some information back and explore.
Yeah, because the first thing that comes to mind, not going off the rails here, but something like the facade incentive program, if somebody's rehabbing an affordable house, or it's going to be, is that something that might be able to be used in that way as well to fund that?
Yes, it could be, and a developer could apply through the county's process for our funding.
And that would limit some of our funding that we use for that program too, I would believe, if I'm saying that correctly.
Yeah, and the difficulty is that the funding can only be used when it comes to existing units. The existing units would have to be affordable, and we don't have very many affordable. I mean, most of the market rate apartment units. We only have one market rate apartment community that has units that are considered affordable. All of our other affordable units are in designated affordable subsidized communities like Carroll Tower, Hunt Club.
Okay, thank you.
An example of a set-aside, is Prairie Center Apartments, is that an example of a set-aside with Anthony Place over there on Prairie Street? Is that an example of that?
Yes.
Okay, all right, just so I'm familiar with, okay, all right.
So just to provide a direct comment for the recommended or suggested action, right now I don't see any reason or justification to increase the fee for 24 compared to what it was in 23. I just see as we need to look at the program and see if it can get changed or it can be utilized more. I don't think asking developers to pay more money is going to solve this at all.
Other comments? Or would you like anything back, or do you feel like you have information?
So we do have an item on for action related to the fee, and I think Ellen can walk through a little bit of background on that one.
Hang on, let me make sure that which one do we have for action right now?
The inclusionary housing fee, item D, I believe. So I can walk through kind of some background on this.
Why don't you do that and get into that?
So back in 2021, we went from a single fee to a three-tiered structure based on unit type. So the current fee for multifamily developments is about $39,000 per affordable unit required. For townhomes, the fee is about $27,000. Single family, it's $15,000. So the fee calculation is based on it's based on a methodology that the Housing Commission came up with a number of years ago, and it's been used ever since. So it's based on various down payment percentages for an affordable home priced at $158,000, which is the affordable home price per IDA's 2018 report. And it was noted at that time that the fees would be recalculated, or the intent was to recalculate the fees based on the 2023 report. So the affordable home price now has gone up to $209,000. And this is significantly higher than last time due to the rise in household income. So if the fees were recalculated based on that new affordable home price, they would be $52,000 for multifamily, $36,000 for townhome, and $20,000 for single family. The Housing Commission discussed this at their last meeting, and they expressed a preference for updating the fees based on the new affordable home price. So that the question for tonight is what to set the fee at for calendar year 2024.
So right now we have a discussion point, but we need to make a motion for we need to set the 2024 fee. Right.
So do you want to
Yeah, so we would have a motion, there's a proposal, if you see in the
okay, so I'll make a motion for the 2024 inclusionary housing fee.
To follow the
new-
schedule put forward that was just discussed.
Yes, the new 2024 fee.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Okay, so I'm gonna use Brian's motion and David's second. I appreciate that all. So, with that, we'll call the roll.
Weber,
No.
Kulturitis,
Yes.
Folks,
No.
Bongar,
Yes.
Munns,
Yes.
Petrilla,
Yes.
Wirball,
Yes.
Festner.
Yes.
Okay, that motion does pass.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes, the presentation of all the affordable housing components, correct?
One more, but it's a separate item.
No? Okay.
I had a quick.
Oh, are we talking about F? Are we moving to F, or are we still on?
Yes, F.
Okay, so, moving on to F, and David?
Yeah, if we're going to F first, I'm going to recuse myself from that, but what about the second part of 3, the policy regarding units, or do we need a motion, or do you just need our direction?
That was feedback.
Yeah, that was.
Oh, there's
that's why we
feedback.
were
Got
getting
it, got
confused
it.
on, because
Yeah.
it says just recommendations.
Right. Okay, cool.
So we are
I'm
in
recusing
F,
myself.
and we're done, and you are recusing
Yes,
yourself.
yes.
Let the record show that. Thank you very much. Take it away.
Thank you. Back in September, the Housing Commission approved $115,000 in funding from the trust fund to Habitat for Humanity of Northern Fox Valley to construct a new home in St. Charles. P&D committee recommended the city donate a parcel at the corner of Dean and 15th Street for the project. This is a city-owned parcel. Since then, we had a plat of survey prepared, which showed the parcel to actually be undersized. It's 4,600 square feet. A lot size of 5,000 square feet is required for a buildable lot in this district. The width and irregular shape of the lot also presents a challenge for siting the house because a corner setback applies from 15th Street as well. So there are 2 options to allow Habitat to build on this parcel. We could request a variance from the Zoning Board of Appeals, and this would be a lot area variance and potentially a setback variance as well. The other option would be to vacate adjacent city right-of-way. So if you see on this diagram, the red shaded area, there's 762 square feet of right-of-way between the east lot line and the sidewalk, allowing for a half-foot buffer along the sidewalk. So this right-of-way could be vacated and then added to the parcel, and that would make the parcel about 5,300 square feet, and there would be more width to work with from that 15th Street because of that 15th Street setback. So we're seeking direction on whether there would be an interest in vacating this additional right-of-way. If so, a plat of vacation would be prepared for council approval, and then after that, all of that land could be, along with the lot, could be donated to Habitat.
Right.
I'm, just to facilitate and move this along, I'm fine with vacating it so we can move this along. I think they've been waiting a while, so
Are you making a motion?
I will make a motion to vacate the lot.
I'd like to second that.
Okay, I've got, Brian with the motion and Kim with the second. Would you please call the roll?
Weber,
Yes.
Kulturitis,
Yes.
Folks,
Yes.
Bongar,
Yes.
Munns,
Yes.
Petrilla, Wirball,
Yes.
Festner.
Yes.
Awesome, that passes. So that concludes business. We're moving to public comment. Do we have any comment from the public? Please come forward, state your name, sir.
Arthur Lemke, 3214 Black Hawk Trail. Just a question subsequent to the discussion about Anthony Place. How many units are in Anthony Place? How many apartments? 75? Just the idea is the size of the project. And I would just ask, if I may, would that be appropriate size for an Anthony Place too?
Yeah, if you take 240.
All right.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Please go forward. John, come on forward and state your name.
Thanks. Most of you know me. My name's John Glenn. I've been on the Housing Commission apparently 10 years now, so I was checking my files before I came out here, and I saw it pop in 2014. Wow, I've been doing it 10 years, and it's been a long slog. So I just wanted to, say thanks for the support of our recommendation. We are just as frustrated as you with how do we use this money, how do we get this job done. I don't like doing the small hits. I want the big wins, and we're struggling with that. So I just wanted to read to you, I got sent to, I don't know, a few weeks ago. It's a CNBC article. We're not alone. We're a wealthy town, which makes it hard for people to buy a house. That kind of has to be accepted in some way. But this article is, why can't today's young adults leave the nest? Blame high housing costs. And I know something about that. I'm a realtor. In fact, when I got on this commission in 2014, that was when the building restarted after the 2006, 7, 8 housing crisis. Builders just shut down. They went out of business. All the contractors disappeared. It wasn't until 2014 it started to lift again. And then we got the COVID, shut it down again, and now the builders are going like crazy. But the prices are going up because lack of supply. And this is countrywide. It's not us. It's not Chicago. It's countrywide. So the key points from this article, if anyone would like it, I can email it to you. Nearly 1/3 or 31% of Generation Z are living with their parents because they can't afford to buy a rent on their own space, according to a recent report. The year 2023 was the least affordable home buying year in more than a decade. I can attest to that. For parents, supporting growing children can be a substantial drain when their own financial security is at risk. However, there are also economic benefits to living in multi-generational households, such as taking care of your parents, I suppose. But those are the key, and there are some, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but it's the least affordable housing market in years, and it's got some points about that. For parents, supporting grown children can be a drain. So I guess I hit the key points with the summary. So I just wanted to let you know that we're all kind of scratching our heads. We meet not every month because it's not every month we have anything to act on, but we act, I'd say 3 or 4 times a year. The renovation funds, almost impossible to find candidates for, so we kind of don't even worry about it at this point. We try getting the word out, we never hear from anybody. So, it just is very frustrating, and I appreciate your patience, and if you want to do big hits, you need bigger ideas, and just collecting this money from these developers is not going to do it, I don't think, in the long term. If we get an Anthony Place 2, that'll be great. We got an Anthony Place 1. We had one success, in my mind. We had a few little that's the only home run. We had a few singles, but we need another home run. And it takes money. Anyway, that's the only thing. Is there any questions?
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the public?
I promised to make this fast.
So we'll bring it up here for staff and elected. Go ahead, Jamie.
I had a quick one. So we had the conversation and the vote on the car dealership, and it brought up some questions for me about how our businesses along our main thoroughfares outside of the business district, handle snowfall. And I really appreciate these businesses investing in the community, especially, the one that came in front of us today. I'd like to see us as a council and as a city explore opportunities to work with these retailers, especially the ones that have long stretches of real estate, to ask them for some commitments to clear their sidewalks during the snowfalls, to allow some more pedestrian and cyclist access, because I see a lot of people during these major snowfalls walking in the street along Route 64 when the snow is covering sidewalks, and it's not safe, and I want to make sure that we have safety for our residents who don't have automobiles, who are either on foot, on bicycles, if one resident that I've seen in a wheelchair actually in the street. And I'd like to see us work with, make some sort of commitment before our next snowy season at the end of this calendar year, really see, some kind of conversation happen about that. And if we're giving these big incentives, I see a lot of investment monetarily for, from these businesses. I'd like to have that be part of it. It's a small piece, but I think it shows a bigger commitment to the community as a whole.
Right.
So for staff, I'm not looking for an answer tonight, but I think we discussed it maybe in the past, Carroll Tower. So I'm hearing from residents there that there are vacant units that are not being filled, and there may be something happening with a conversion in the future or whatever. I know it's affordable housing for seniors. So if we can inquire about that and just see if there's any validity to what they're saying, and what is our role in that, if at all, I don't know. But it's concerning to me after hearing what happened to River Glen. I know it's another private development, but I want to make sure if something is happening there that they are complying with whatever, if it's a PUD or whatever it is from years ago. If we could just look into that, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, just a quick commentary. I know that I've talked with both the chief of police on this as well as our community development director. There is some transition happening in ownership, I believe, but it is outside anything that would be under the city's purview in regards to planned unit development, any zoning approvals. We have worked with them as far as any potential liabilities, any potential legal matters that we could with the police side of it, but there is nothing really else that falls to the city, so we are aware of what's going on and trying to facilitate any help as best we can, but right now there's nothing that we can really step in to change the course of anything.
So then that affordable housing piece at Carroll Tower, that is slowly transitioning out. Is that what your understanding is?
You want to comment on that, Ross?
So we don't have the information to know if that's the case or not.
Okay.
It was recently sold, and there's a major reinvestment going on in the building, which might be why some of the units are being left vacant, but it may still, in fact, remain as an affordable project. If we can, information we can try and get.
Yeah, if you can just get that, and then I can reach out to some of those residents that live in the Carroll Tower, and just, if it's not true, and it's not, and maybe they're just remodeling the unit for additional seniors, that makes sense to me, but I just want to, any concerns they have, I want to alleviate it if that is the case.
Yes, we can try and
okay. Thank you, I appreciate
that information.
Steph, any other comments? Alexis? Alderman? Okay, with that, we have no additional items, no executive session, so I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Moved and seconded, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, adjourned, thank you.